Do not adjust your digital device. What you are about to see and hear may shock and appall you. Join our hosts as they encounter countless thrills, spills, chills, and hilarity as they explore the very weirdest in pop culture. The following media is so strange, so beyond the scope of what is normal, it will make you ask the question, why does this exist? Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Why Does This Exist? I'm Chris.
I'm Rob.
And we are going to be continuing our Halloween Oktoberfest with the works of a cunning author, a wonderful author, probably one of the most celebrated authors, or at least one of the most celebrated Halloween authors. We're not talking about Stephen King. We're not even talking about Clive Barker. We've already talked about H.P. Lovecraft, so that could only mean one other person. We're talking about a Edgar Allan Poe. Cue the organ. Poe is a wonderful lad. He did very, very interesting and iconic works, such as The Raven, of course. Ligeia we were just talking about, which the Canadian thrash metal band Annihilator actually has a really cool song on about it. Maybe we'll do a bonus thing for the Patreon on it, since we haven't done something for Patreon in a long time. And he's also done plenty of others like The Mask of the Red Death, which I think is my favorite.
That's my favorite story too.
Yeah, as well as The Fall of the House of Usher, and there's
Black Cat.
Yeah, Angel of Odd actually is one that I read for the first time over the weekend, and that was a really cool one. We'll talk about that, but
Yes.
but first, a word from people who are not our sponsors. Why Does This Exist? We're a show all about the very weirdest in pop culture, whether it's past, present, or future. Doesn't make a difference if it is a movie, a book, music, or even some weird toy like the pet rock or anything like that. If it existed and it was weird, and if it might even exist at some point in the future, you name it, we got it. We'll talk about it at some point in time if we haven't talked about it already. If you want to give us some money, that would be really, really swell. You could do that and get some bonus goodies, and you could even get to pick a show that we would have to do, and we'd be legally bound by our own terms.
Right, don't say that. Now they're going to sue us.
Well, no, I mean, they can't sue us. We just do the show.
Oh. Yeah, but what if it's something like fucking Nazis or something like that?
I mean, we don't, just as long as they don't say that it was a good thing, I guess we could still do it, technically.
I guess.
Like, we could just say how Nazis are an abomination and they should have never existed, but they did. But I don't want to do that episode, so maybe we'll put a clause in there. Anything within reason, but not Nazis. This is a good point. I'll have to weave this into our contracts.
Yeah, see, you always gotta watch out for those little catch-22s there.
This is true. That is a good point. Man, we might have to call Stephen P. New on this one. But you can help us by heading over to Patreon at patreon.com/whydoesthisexist, where you get some extra goodies because you gave us some money. Do we have an understanding there? Okay, then. If you also want us to just kind of like talk about something, or even just tell us how we're doing, you can do that in two places. And one of those places you could listen to things too. The first of which is why does this exist show at gmail.com. You could send us an email and tell us how we're doing. Tell us if there's anything that you'd like to hear us talk about. Maybe we'll take it up for debate. We'll talk about it, and then everything will be hunky dory. Or you can go to probably where most people would end up just going anyway, and you can head on over to YouTube, where obviously you go to the channel. Why does this exist? You click on our videos, which sometimes they're clips, sometimes it's full episodes, and you send it. And what you're going to do is you're going to like us, you're going to subscribe to us, and you're going to comment on the videos. You could even dislike the videos. I really don't care, because YouTube is going to show it to people anyway. And in this day and age, people tend to look at things that get more negatively reviewed anyway, because we live in a society that hates itself. I don't really know.
We live in a society.
Yeah, that's the first problem. This is our counterculture, pop culture thing, known as Why Does This Exist? You can also like us on social media, like us on Facebook, facebook.com/Why Does This Exist Pod, and you can also follow us on Twitter at WDTE Pod, or just find us on Twitter at Why Does This Exist Pod, basically. Also, you can check out our episodes and more, which the more would be, of course, articles, and at some point we will probably have a shop, or you can just buy some t-shirts or something. We're starting to take some looks at that, just through various programs. We're going to try to see if maybe we could get some shirts or something like that going. So you could do that as whydoesthisexistpod.com. That's whydoesthisexistpod.com. And you can also check us out wherever you get your podcasts. That's Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, Pandora, TuneIn, Alexa, iHeartRadio, Player FM, Listen Notes, and Stitcher. That's the news. Here's the weather. You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge from a group of ragtag rogues. Now let's get on with the goddamn show. Edgar Allan Poe.
That was a rhyme. You must be a poet and you didn't even know it.
No, actually, I've been listening to Wu-Tang Clan all weekend. I've got ridiculous flow right now.
Well, speaking of poets, we have Edgar Allan Poe, one of the most prolific and well-known American poets. A very interesting character.
If not the most famous American poet.
Yeah, definitely up there. I mean, if not the most famous, definitely in top 5.
For sure. A lot more than you know a lot more about him than I do. So why don't I just take a back seat and shut the hell up for once in my goddamn life, and you can take it away.
All right. Well, Poe was born in Boston, January 19th, 1809. He was the son of two actors, an actor and an actress. Jesus. Basically, they grew up there. I believe his parents passed away when he was young, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
Okay, no. So what happened is his father abandoned the family, and his mother died from tuberculosis.
Oh, so I guess his dad was not very nice.
No, he was basically adopted by other people, and apparently they were assholes to him. So, so whatever. He grew up. He was in the United States Army. He was, he finished his military career, came out and started writing, and much like many writers who write fiction, he actually, for his day job, wrote for various different publications. He mostly wrote, he wrote poetry, he wrote prose and stuff, but also, wrote articles, he wrote essays, just to kind of make a living. He was never rich in life. His works were, they were known. They weren't like crazy well known, but he really, didn't, prosper and become more prolific until after he had passed away, which he had passed away at the age of 40, and under some suspicious circumstances. So we'll talk about that later in a new edition of Fact or Whacked.
Truth or whacked. Truth or whacked.
Truth or whacked. So we'll talk about that towards the end of the show. But anyway, Poe was really most well known for his macabre, dark, gothic style of writing. Most of his stories have like very dark tones that are like often involved with death or murders, mysteries. He actually wrote 3 mysteries, detective stories. So not only an innovator in gothic writing, but also detective writing. His short story "Murders in the Rue Morgue" is actually described as one of the first modern detective stories.
That's cool.
And it was about his character C. Auguste Dupin, who was basically like Poe's version of Sherlock Holmes. And Sherlock Holmes probably would not exist without Edgar Allan Poe. Because again,
I didn't know that came after.
Yeah, no, Sherlock Holmes was in the late 1800s, so Poe was really the first writer of modern detective stories.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
That is really neat.
So
actually,
yeah. He
So I mean, I guess technically you would then say that without Edgar Allan Poe, there is no Batman, because Batman is based off of Batman's kind of an amalgam of Zorro and Sherlock Holmes. So without Sherlock Holmes, there is no Batman, and without Edgar Allan Poe, there is no Sherlock Holmes. So Batman is all Edgar Allan Poe's fault if you really want to go backwards.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could blame Poe for a lot of stuff that we have now. Like basically modern horror. He invented the modern horror genre as well.
Oh yeah.
Gothic horror. Just gothic themes in general of darkness and cold and black and death. It wasn't super popular before Poe, and he has like a variety. I mean, not every one of his stories was like this dark, about death or darkness, but he always had this slight macabre kind of tilt to them.
Right, and they weren't all these like these terrible tragedies. He also wrote a lot of comedies too.
Yes, and in fact, some of his like darker stories were comedic in tone. So I guess you could really say he was an innovator in black humor too.
Yeah, I would say so.
Black comedy, I should say.
Yeah.
Like The Telltale Heart is just like for those who don't know, it's about a crazy guy. He kills his boss, who he's like the guy's servant or whatever, and because of his boss's clouded, pale blue vulture-like eye, it disturbs him. So he ends up killing him, and he buries his body under the floorboards, and you kind of just see this guy's descent into madness, and he's just like it's like almost like a just comedic in a way because of like how stupid and like giddy he gets about like telling his tale, and then basically just his craziness is what leads him to be discovered because he can hear his the guy he murdered's heartbeat under the floorboards, and it makes him rip up. So it's kind of like this like I guess slightly comedic ending to a pretty dark story, Well,
I mean, we've all been there. Who hasn't killed their boss because of a black clouded, blue clouded vulture-like eye?
Yeah.
Just me? I guarantee you some like stupid like news outlet will just like pick this up and they'll be like, this guy murdered his old boss, like who has a black clouded eye, and I'm sure I've just opened up a can of worms for myself. I have never killed a person, nor do I plan to. Especially a boss, as a disclaimer. I'm just making this worse. Well, anyway, you could blame that on Poe, too.
So anyway, Poe actually lived in the Bronx after he had moved out of Boston. He was also in love with his cousin, and I
Well,
believe she died of tuberculosis as well, as same thing as his mother.
I mean,
Um,
it was a lot more common. I mean, he married
yes,
a cousin actually,
yeah,
who was well. I mean, I don't know how old he was, how much younger she was.
she was
At the,
fairly
she
younger than
was
him, I
she
believe.
was 13, so I got to imagine he was at least like 17 or 18, which is, but that it was a much different time. This was when at 40, at the age that he died, he was probably considered an old man
Well,
because I
kind of,
mean,
yeah,
this was like the 1800s, so like it wasn't uncommon for someone to die before like 30.
yeah. Um, he was also a drunk, and he abused drugs. I believe opium.
Mm.
So, he was a character. He had some problems. But I think, you know, some of his problems kind of, especially losing his mother and his wife. And, like, he really did love his wife. Like, it wasn't
Yeah.
like, it was, again, this is a different time. He married his cousin. It was a different time. People did that back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think she was, like, his first cousin. I think she was, like, his, like, third or fourth cousin. So it wasn't that bad, I guess.
I
Still
guess,
kind of
but
weird.
yeah, but I mean, this was just the times. Like, I mean, and also a lot of times there was just direct incest, like that would happen in that would happen with like royal blood and like barons or something. They would do they would intermarry and like directly just to keep the bloodline pure, or at least that was
Yeah.
the thought process behind it. Which just, I mean, if you look at it now, it's obviously very very gross, but this was just what the ideologies were at the time, and there was no science. There wasn't really enough science to prove that this wasn't a good idea.
Yeah. So yeah, she was 13 and he was 36
Oh, that's
when they got married.
oh, that's weird.
Yeah. Which again, oh, they were first cousins.
Ah,
Oh no, okay, he was 27. Sorry, I did the math wrong. He was
that does
27.
that
Not
still
much
does.
better though.
Yeah, that doesn't
No,
make it right.
no, it doesn't. So she actually died only at the age of 24.
Okay.
And that was when they were living in the Bronx, which was weird because they lived in a cottage in the Bronx. It was like a friggin' hat. Well, I guess again, different time. There wasn't as much city back then.
Yeah, I cannot
Um,
picture a cottage in the Bronx.
no, but it's still there actually.
That sounds like the title of a novel, actually. A cottage.
Cottage in the Bronx. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is still there. I believe it's like preserved as Edgar Allan Poe's house.
Hmm.
Um, so, but again, just an innovator in all kinds of different genres. I think you had mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that your favorite short story is Mask of the Red Death, and that's mine too. Which again, kind of appropriate for the time that we're living in. With
Yes.
COVID. For people, the uninitiated, Mask of the Red Death basically is about this countryside that gets ravaged by some kind of pandemic. It's called the Red Death. Um, it's kind of implied it's like the plague, basically, but
Hmm.
it's not really like just it's kind of like just like a generic thing that kills a lot of people. So this hoity-toity guy, he's like a lord or some kind of
Prince.
aristocrat,
He's a
prince.
yeah
Oh,
Prince Prosperous, which
yes,
very ironic.
yeah. Basically invites all the friggin' aristocracy into his castle and like they lock themselves in and just have like a giant party while like everyone's dying outside.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a costume party, and it's got these rooms that are all like themed with different colors. And basically, this party goer wearing a red mask and a cloak just like appears in this party, and in the farthest most room, which is like it's a black room with red curtains that make the room look like it's like blood tinted. It's like blood red curtains basically, and he just goes through the party and basically kills everyone. And it's he's basically the personification of this plague, and it's kind
Hmm.
of like this.
Well, they
Uh,
also call it the Red Death because your whole basically like all of your it's almost like all your blood vessels like burst at the same time, essentially, or like the blood.
Yeah, it's like Ebola.
Yeah, and like the blood rushes to his face, and like it gives you this like crimson mask. So he's
Yes.
directly personified, and this offends people.
Yeah.
Eventually, find out that it's him. But keep going.
Yeah, it's actually like the plague. So basically that's what it is. It's like, he took a concept of like this plague that's devastating everybody and turned it into like an actual entity. Basically that all the people in the castle get the Red Death and die. And it's kind of a lesson against hubris and like, I think it could be applied even to like coronavirus, especially in the beginning of the pandemic when people like you had those like parties, these college parties where like, if you showed up with coronavirus, you got in for free, and then like whoever got it first at the party won like money from a pool or
Oh
something.
God, I
They
forgot
would
that
put
they
like
did that.
$5 in. Yeah,
There's been so
like
much crap that's happened in like such a short time that I totally forgot about some things.
I know it's like
Why?
but it's like the same thing as the Mask of the Red Death, though. Like
It
the
is.
same friggin' people being stupid and not treating something like that seriously. Um, so it was like just all of his stories kind of had these like lessons that could be learned. Like the characters always get their comeuppance, so to speak. Except there's a couple that I guess they don't. Like the cask of Amontillado, the bad guy, quote unquote, doesn't really get anything, but the one guy gets bricked up in the wall.
Oh,
Like
that sucks.
so. Yeah. So I guess not everybody. There's certain instances of people getting their comeuppance, basically. Like the
Well,
Black Cat is perfect for that too.
yeah. Well, there's one that I was reading the other day called "The Angel of Odd." This is actually one of his comedies where the person. Okay, so they don't. So they kind of get their comeuppance, but not quite.
Mm.
Like usually the person ends up like dying or something like horrible happens to them. And like the Angel of Odd is like this guy's a drunk. So I'm wondering if he like kind of like wrote this as like a thing for himself.
Oh yeah, I'm sure he absolutely did.
So the guy's a drunk, and he falls asleep in his armchair or whatever, and he gets visited by the Angel of Odd, and the Angel of Odd is like I guess he has like some kind of a European accent. It seems more like it's like French, like
Hmm.
French German kind of accent. Anyway, so the Angel of Odd is like this totally wasted, thin, pale angel, and he keeps pressuring him into continuing to drink. Um, and the guy's just like kind of like weirded out by him, but he ends up continuing to drink, and then he goes to try to like find some lady, and like so he could like marry, so he could woo this like rich woman who's been like who's just constantly had bad luck with her husband, but she's a wealthy woman, and he tries to like woo her, and because he's drunk all the time, he like he he like stumbles over her, and his toupee falls off. So like so she doesn't want anything to do with him, and then like in his like drunken stupor, he ends up breaking his arm, and he ends up like getting visited by the Angel of Odd repeatedly with every instance, and then eventually he grabs onto a and oh, also his house burns down in the beginning too. So first his house burns down, and then he breaks his arm trying to woo this woman. And then he ends up going getting on this hot air balloon thing because he's thinking about jumping off the bridge, and he changes his mind. He gets on this hot air balloon, and he's visited by the Angel of Odd, and this time he's sober, and the angel is like telling him, "Oh, you should drink more." Like, of course. So he keeps telling him, "Oh, you should keep drinking." And there's a particular like type of there's a particular brand of like beer or wine or whatever it is that the angel keeps like trying to make him drink, and and the guy is holding on for dear life onto the string of this hot air balloon with one arm. So he's trying his best to like see how long it can last basically, and the angel visits him, and he's like, "No, I'm totally sober." And the angel's like, "Well, you should drink this anyway." He's like, "No, I don't want it." And the angel's like, "Okay, well, if you don't want it, like, can you say, I promise to never drink again?" He's like, "I promise to never drink again." He's like, "I need you to really say it." And he's like, and he does. And he's like, "Okay, well, I need you to take your right arm and put it into your left arm, like a praying motion, basically." And he's like, I can't do that because my arm is broken and I'm in a sling, basically. And the angel's like, "Okay." So the angel like cuts the string off. So the angel cuts the rope, and he like conveniently falls into he falls through the chimney of his house, which has now been repaired in this time, and he ends up basically waking up in his chair that he originally had fallen asleep in when the house had burned down in the first place. It's almost like a like at the end of A Christmas Carol, and he wakes up and he's not dead or anything, and he's just like he basically learns his lesson in just being a drunk idiot.
Yeah.
But there's the but as we said before, there's always like the hint of the macabre there. So
Mm-hmm.
as he's stirring, he notices a broken bottle of the brand that the Angel of Odd was trying to give him.
Oh, so it was
So
real.
yeah, so it's really interesting stuff. But
Yeah.
I had never read that one before, and I actually kind of liked it. I thought it was a cool one.
Yeah. Poe's poetry tends to be more on the tragic side. A
Hmm.
lot of his poems are about uh, beautiful women who die. So that's like Annabel Lee, The Raven, and I think that's kind of related to his wife
I would say
passing
so.
away and his mother, both of tuberculosis.
Yeah.
Um,
Do they die specifically of tuberculosis in any of
n-
them, or does
no, but they
it
like
mention that
they
they
die of some
died?
kind of unnamed illness kind of
Oh,
thing.
okay.
Yeah. Um, and they all like were married young and stuff and then passed away of some illness, so again, obviously based off of real life, he was putting his own life experiences into his work.
Hmm.
um the Raven is obviously his most famous poem, and that's basically about the narrator is kind of like sitting in his study, kind of like dozing off, thinking about just stuff, and you know all of a sudden this raven starts like tapping on his chamber door, and it's he gets freaked out. He thinks it's like a ghost or something because he's thinking about his long lost love who had passed away, who's named Lenore. um and he keeps kind of like hoping that he'll be able to see her again, and then the raven says, this is the famous line, quoth the raven nevermore, because she's dead, she's gone, and it's
Well, we
oh and
there.
And it's like a lot of his characters kind of have this like descent into madness where they're trying to like, remember the past, or like, they're just there's something mentally off with them, and they have some kind of mental illness. It's most of his characters. At least in his darker stuff.
Mhm. I mean, a lot of them have just been traumatized by something.
Yes.
They don't usually. He doesn't usually specify what, but we just know that they've been disturbed by something,
Yeah.
and that's kind of what makes them unhinged.
Yeah. My favorite poem by Edgar Allan Poe is El Dorado, which is another pretty dark one. Basically, it's about this knight that is searching for the lost golden city of El Dorado. And it's kind of like implied that basically he searched his whole life until he died and then continued to search for it because it's one of those, it's like an unfindable place. Um, so he basically he's journeying along. He gets old, and he kind of die. It doesn't say that he dies directly, but he as like he's been searching his whole life for the lost city of El Dorado, and then all of a sudden he like basically comes upon a ghost, a pilgrim shadow is what they call it, so a ghost essentially.
Mm.
And the
That's a
shadow
cool.
basically,
That's a cool band name, Pilgrim Shadow.
yeah.
Or yeah, I would like that. I would do that, or like a song title.
Yeah. That could be about El Dorado, the
Yeah.
poem.
Anyway,
Uh,
continue.
Basically, the shadow basically tells him that El Dorado is, and this is the actual, I'll quote the direct poem, over the mountain of the moon, down the valley of the shadow. Ride, boldly ride, the shade replied, if you seek for El Dorado. So, over the mountains of the moon and down the valley of the shadow, it's basically like the shade is basically implying that it's not like a place that can be found. It's not a tangible place. So this knight wasted his whole life looking for something that doesn't exist, which is El Dorado. And I think it's a kind of like a good allegory for just stuff in general, like life in general. How many people like search their whole lives trying to like fit in or make themselves like better or find their fortune or something like that, and then they waste their life doing that.
Mm.
It's kind of an allegory for that.
Cool. I mean, I haven't really read very many of his poems. I'll be honest. And like just now, I like as you were explaining that, I actually was read the Conqueror Worm, which is actually a pretty interesting one, where it's just like just kind of a weird one, where like it's basically I don't really know what it's about, but it's like I haven't thought about it enough. Like I said, I literally just read it, but
Mhm.
it's kind of interesting. I think it has to do with the play, but it's also like reality also.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of tethered in. So like basically it's like they're sitting in a theater. Yeah, like they're sitting in a theater, they're watching this thing, and then like, but but like they're basically just going to die anyway. So it's like they're watching something, and it's like life imitates art, basically
Yeah.
kind of gathering. So it's like motley drama. Oh, be sure it shall not be forgot, with its phantom chased forevermore by a crowd that sees it not, through a circle that ever returneth into the self same spot, and much of madness and more of sin and horror the soul of the plot. But see amid the mimic rout a quarreling shape intrude, a blood red thing that rides from out the scenic solitude. It rides with mortal pangs. The mimes become its food, and seraphs sob at venom fangs, in human gore imbued. Out are the lights, out all, and over each quivering form, the curtain of funeral pall comes down with the rush of a storm, while the angels, all pallid and wan, uprising, unveiling, affirm that is the play is the tragedy, man. That the play is the tragedy, man, and it's Hero the Conqueror Worm. So, I mean, that's like the last half of it.
Mhm.
Basically, it's just like it's basically kind of taking Shakespeare's All the World's a Stage and just kind of turning it on its head in a way where it's just like we're all gonna die.
Yeah.
Like it's essentially
That was a lot of his poems were like dark like that, and they also had these like kind of hidden meanings and allusions to other things. And I also like that his poems are like they almost tell a story in their own way in this like little contained thing. It's almost like reading prose because of like the imagery in the poems that he comes out with. It's like you could really imagine it and picture it in your head.
yeah.
And it's like almost like reading a story. Like Annabel Lee, the first verse of Annabel Lee is, "It was many years ago in a kingdom by the sea that a maiden there lived, whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me." So it's like he really sets it up like you kind of like see it in your head, this kingdom by the sea and like this maiden, and it's just he really has a great way of describing stuff and just really pulling you into the story or the poem.
Yeah. And actually, like and some of them continue into other ones. Like I think, Lenore is also a poem, and I think it came out in the same year, 1845, and I don't know if it preceded the Raven. I mean, I imagine it may have. I'm not sure. I haven't read it, but I'm guessing that this is about the woman Lenore who died,
Mm.
possibly, or it could just be somebody else who also was named Lenore, and he just kind of takes it in from there. But also, um, he also wrote The City in the Sea, which is mentioned in Annabelle Lee, as you just said, and also in his short story like Gia, the 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 narrator and his wife who like falls ill and dies, she composes the Conqueror Worm. So
Mhm.
there's a callback to like he was great with callbacks.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like he created this own little world where all of his stories kind of like fit in to each other, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
and his but you're right. He does vividly tell a story, and it's very descriptive. Where and while H.P. Lovecraft was also very descriptive, like we said,
mm,
he was like Lovecraft is a lot more. He he's much more detailed with everything that's going on.
yes.
Where Poe visually sets the stage. He visually like he doesn't tell you what the characters look like. He doesn't tell you like the appearance of the room being disheveled or anything like that. Like he lets you leave enough to your imagination, but he also tells you what's going on, and he tells it in such a vivid way that you could really get a great picture for what's going on.
Yeah, it's kind of like this crazy like um balance between like being like he can really describe something and make you visualize it in like fewer words than a lot of other people, a lot of other writers could.
Mm-hmm.
He's just got like the language that he uses. It really kind of like like makes your like sparks that imagination and like can really picture what he's trying to say in your head. At least that's always how it's been for me reading Poe, and I've been reading Poe since I was like a kid. So you know,
I actually really like and well, I mean, I guess we'll get to that in a minute, but like his flow is just really like is just really on par too.
yes,
Really, what sets the stage for it as well. It's not even just visually; it's also the whole like flow of the poem. It just kind
yeah, the meter and the rhyming, it all is very good. Like he was very good at doing all these different meters and rhymes and stuff, and actually, you know, was kind of has like a sing songy quality to it.
I bet you he would have been a great rapper.
Probably.
We should totally do that. Like, just get like some like, just get some kind of like, just get like some like dark gothic orchestra and just like put it behind behind like a funky drummer beat and just kind of like and just do Poe songs.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that might actually work, and I wouldn't be, but you can't call it poetry because that's stupid. Might not be a bad idea. You know, maybe we'll do that one day.
Yeah.
Just like that actually might, yeah. You know what the hell? Let's do it. That'd be hilarious. Anyway, if you want to see that, give us some money on Patreon, and maybe
Yeah.
just make like a maybe we'll make an exclusive album just for you, and we'll give you the Bandcamp link. How about that, everybody? Yeah.
All right.
All right, $20. Let's do it. I didn't say it'd be cheap.
Poe is in like you know we talked about how he's inspired like obviously so many writers after him. But the amount of like media that has been like based off of Poe's work is like you couldn't even like begin to talk about it because there's so much. Like they made making movies of Poe's films or films of Poe's works from the early night basically since film was a thing. Um, the early 1900s all the way up till today. In fact, Netflix is actually doing a series based on the fall of the House of Usher. It's going to be an 8 episode series, miniseries.
That's interesting.
Um,
I
yeah,
wonder if they can. Well, I mean, I'm sure they'll figure out a way to carry because I mean, I guess it'll develop the relationship with the person's boss and like everything else going on in the guy's life that goes wrong that he goes crazy over.
yeah,
It's. I feel like it'll be worth watching.
yeah. I think so too. And hopefully, maybe it'll inspire them to do more miniseries based on other Poe works. Would be pretty cool.
Yeah, that would be
Um,
like a nice little anthology series.
yeah. I think the most famous films are probably the ones that starred Vincent Price, and I think Vincent Price really became associated pretty heavily with Edgar Allan Poe. Um,
Yeah. I mean,
y-
Vincent Price is just unbelievable.
yeah. Um, I know when I hear like Vincent Price's voice, it really reminds me of Edgar Allan Poe. Probably more specifically because I think I think it was the Animaniacs. They did a Poe sketch at some point, and I think it
Yeah, I
was
think they
if it
did.
wasn't if it wasn't Vincent Price actually voicing him, I know they got someone like very close to him that was able to do Vincent Price's voice like perfectly.
Yeah, they did also parody this on The Simpsons on one of their Treehouse of Horrors. They didn't get Vincent Price or anything, but it was Homer, and it
Hmm.
was kind of like tweaked it enough where it was just slightly different, but it was still technically the Raven.
Yeah.
I forget what the plot is. That's a little bit different. I haven't seen it in a while, but they changed like one or two things, but it's pretty funny. You know, like we said before, like just countless bands have just
Hmm.
songs based on their works.
I, I I think Edgar Allan Poe is probably the most adapted American author
I would think so.
in terms of like TV shows, music, like parodies. Like I would say he's probably the most adapted of all of them, and again, rightfully so because his stories just inspire all these images and stuff. I think it makes sense that so many movies and TV shows and parodies have been made on it and music and everything because it's just like it's like the perfect stories for that.
Yeah, and I mean, it even inspires business names like Rumorg Magazine. Like, where else
Yes,
did it come from?
exactly.
You know, which is an which I think it's still in business to this day. Actually, it's a horror magazine. If you can't
Yeah,
tell.
I believe it is still in because I think it's included in if you get like that horror crate, it's like one of those monthly subscription things where you get a bunch like t-shirts and little tchotchke stuff and I think Rue Morgue magazine is in that
Oh, that's
with
cool.
yeah.
Probably with Fangoria and a bunch of other ones.
Yeah.
Neat. I think the comic book store next to me actually carries Rumorg. I gotta check. I haven't been there in a couple months.
Hmm. And of course you have Iron Maiden's song Murders in the Rue Morgue.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so much stuff that is, kind of based off of Poe's work. It's like you could never even go through the list because it's like probably hundreds or maybe even thousands of films since the dawn of film, basically,
Yeah,
and TV shows, and it's crazy.
it is. The only thing is just that it's like Lovecraft. He died poor, and it's a shame that like some of these people. It's a shame that someone so celebrated just they never see the rewards while they're alive.
Yeah, and that happens unfortunately more often than not. I feel like,
Yeah, I would
you
say
look at
so
how many
too.
artists that were like starving artists during their whole life, and then they passed away, and then their artworks became worth thousands or millions of dollars.
Right, like Basquiat, or like how many or or how many musicians like just
Yeah,
died poor. They just had like financial troubles, and then years after their death, their music suddenly just becomes like huge.
yeah,
You know,
yeah. It happened all the time.
yep.
Um, it's sad because you would want these people that are so celebrated. It's sad that they didn't get to enjoy that success, you know, earlier in their life. It really is sad and it sucks. Um,
Mm-hmm. They even made little video game characters out of him, like the Poes from The Legend of Zelda.
yeah,
The little ghosties that are just carrying the lanterns just in the cemetery and at night in like just around the castle.
yeah.
I really hope that they do a Wind Waker Switch revision. That would just be really cool.
All they would really have to do is port the HD thing that they did for the Wii U, which I'm sure that wouldn't be too hard.
Probably not. All right. Anyway, so Poe, I guess this might lead us into I guess this might lead us into our segment because there is something that you mentioned earlier that I
Yes.
agreed. We did this on the Stanley Kubrick episode. At some point, I'm going to try to get some music for this, or if you want to come up with some music, feel free to send that over to whydoesthisexistshow@gmail.com. And who knows, maybe you'll be a wicked contender, and we'll put you down, and we'll make that the official theme song of the Truth or Whack segment. So if you didn't listen to the Clockwork Orange episode, well, shame on you. But also, if you didn't, please do so. And Truth or Whacked is a segment that we brought up on that show. There's only been one other one, and it's basically where we take someone, or more of like a famous character, like a famous person, if you will, like a celebrity of some kind, and who died under mysterious circumstances, and we either try to say whether or not and we, like, Rob and I basically just weigh in on whether or not this person actually did perish the way that media and speculation said that they did, such as a car accident, or if someone shot them, or something like that, or if they were in fact whacked by somebody, or if like something terrible happened and like somebody just wanted them gone, like if it was like a mob thing or whatever it was, then we kind of weigh in, and we pretty much speculate as to what actually could have happened. We just try to debunk stuff. This is an interesting little segment. So, without further ado, Truth or Whacked on Edgar Allan Poe. So first, bring everybody up to speed on this.
Okay.
I'm
just gonna read directly from Wikipedia because it's just easier than me trying to like friggin' describe what happened. So, on September 27th, 1849, Poe left Richmond, Virginia on his way home to New York City. No reliable evidence exists about his whereabouts until a week later on October 3rd, when he was found delirious in Baltimore at Ryan's Tavern, sometimes referred to as Gunner's Hall. A printer named Joseph W. Walker sent a letter requesting help to Joseph E. Snodgrass, an acquaintance of Poe. His letter
weird name.
Yeah. Oh, it was the 1800s.
Yeah, I guess so.
The letter read, "Dear Sir, there is a gentleman, rather worse for the wear, at Ryan's 4th Ward polls, who goes under the cognomen, which I guess is just a fancy word for name, of Edgar Allan Poe, who appears in great distress and says he is acquainted with you, and I assure you he is in need of immediate assistance. In yours in haste, Joseph W. Walker." Which, again, he calls himself Joseph E. Snodgrass, but... So, the 1800s were weird.
Yeah.
He later claimed that the note said that Poe was in a state of beastly intoxication. His first account describes Poe's appearance as repulsive, with unkempt hair, a haggard, unwashed face, and lustrous and vacant eyes. His clothing, which included a dirty shirt but no vest and unpolished shoes, was worn and did not fit well. The attending physician gives his own detailed account of Poe's appearance: that they a stained, faded old bombazine coat, pantaloons of a similar character, a pair of worn-out shoes run down to the heels, and an old straw hat. Poe was never coherent long enough to explain how he came to be in this condition, and is believed his clothes he was wearing were not his own, not at least because he was wearing shabby clothes that was out of character for him. So basically, he turns up at this bar in Baltimore. He's delirious. He's obviously intoxicated, and he dies. But they did find him, and they did try to bring him to the doctor and stuff, but he was not doing well. Apparently, he made references to his wife in Richmond, who was probably his wife Virginia, that had passed away. Or it could have been his fiance, who was not married to yet. He didn't have any belongings with him, and he died October 7th, 1849.
That's my mom's birthday. That's weird. Well,
Yeah.
1849. That is weird. We actually just celebrated it. That's interesting. Okay. Well, I guess.
So the cause his cause of death was never really determined. It's been speculated. All the medical records, including his death certificate, have been lost if they ever existed, according to Wikipedia.
That's kind of weird. I mean, but
Yes,
also we've said this before that in the 1800s there was terrible record keeping of just many things.
right. There's been various theories that have been put forward. Some people that say that he might have tried to commit suicide. Apparently, he nearly died of an overdose of laudanum in 1848. Which, for those who don't know, laudanum is it was basically a tincture of opium, which was used for various diseases, pain relief, cough medicine. It was one of those like 1800s drugs that you could just buy over the counter, even though it was like a hard drug, and just drink it.
Wow.
Yeah, it was used as a tranquilizer, various different things. So apparently he had almost died in 1848 from that. Although, according to Wikipedia, it's unclear if it was a true suicide attempt or just a miscalculation on Poe's part, and it did not lead to Poe's death a year later. So, again, so many different things. Apparently, his obituary or his death announcement had said that he died of let's see, let me see the exact words, because it was kind of like a weird thing they used to do in the 1800s. So the newspaper at the time reported his death as congestion of the brain or cerebral inflammation, which were common euphemisms at the time for death from disreputable causes such as alcoholism. So in the 1800s, they were kind of reporting that he died of alcoholism. It's been speculated he might have had some kind of untreated illness, like a brain tumor, some kind of different things like that. Diabetes, some kind of enzyme deficiency, syphilis, hundreds of different things they've said. So
this is a weird one. So a theory in 1872 is just that cooping was the cause of Poe's death.
Yes. So this is the fact, or this is the truth or whacked part. So because they really never found out how he died, it was just kind of assumed that it was because he was a drunk or he had some kind of untreated disease. In 1872, so this theory was put forward that he maybe was a victim of cooping, which kind of fits with the fact that he was both drunk or drugged or something, and also wearing not his clothes. So basically, cooping, and if we could bring it back, be a little topical. Everyone's talking about election fraud. How bad it is nowadays, but you know what? Election fraud is as American as apple pie, because it happened back in Edgar Allan Poe's time too.
This is a very timely podcast.
Yeah. So cooping basically is citizens. They would kidnap people off the street and force them to vote for certain candidates by threatening them, drugging them, beating them up, various things. And oftentimes they would make the people do it again and again, basically changing their clothes and putting fake noses on and fake wigs and beards and sending them in again to vote for the same person. And apparently this was quite common in the 1800s, Again, that's what I'm saying. Election fraud is as American as apple pie, because it's been happening since the beginning. But there's a theory that Edgar Allan Poe might have been a victim of cooping, and basically they had took him, forced him to vote, and either beat him up, drugged him, did something to him, and that's why he kind of just turned up in Baltimore, in this delirious state, and not wearing clothes that fit him, and it was just a very bizarre situation, which I think could be true, kind of. I think it could be a whacking here. Maybe not purposeful whacking, but I think whatever happened to him,
an unintentional whacking.
Yeah. And of course, this is the 1800s. They don't have forensics, really. They don't have any kind of way to determine how he really died.
Right. Besides, this was a time where they may have even still used leeches to as like an ailment.
Yeah. So who knows? Maybe he did have some kind of untreated illness. Maybe he didn't. I kind of think the cooping thing is probably like
I'd say it's likely.
yeah, I would say so too. Um, because it makes so much sense and it works and the theory kind of fits. Obviously there was no investigation done because at that time, like if someone died under mysterious circumstances, unless they had like a friggin' knife in their back or a bullet wound, they're like, he just probably was a drunk, you know. So there's really no way they're ever going to be able to tell or find out unless there's some record of this hidden somewhere in some secret society's fucking filing cabinet buried in friggin' a basement somewhere in Baltimore or something. But I really highly doubt it.
So that's what's locked in the Vatican.
Probably. So we'll probably really never know what happened to him. Like I said, I think the cooping thing fits pretty well, but
Yeah,
who
I
knows?
mean, it does make a lot more sense as to why it would be. It definitely, I can't see it being like heart disease, epilepsy, syphilis, or any of these other things that they said that it could be. I mean, even
No.
these is like weird, but I I totally could see it just as like, I mean, he was known to enjoy like drugs. He was known to enjoy like drugs and alcohol. So like he could have, so like they either drugged him or he was already drugged to begin with and
Mm,
kept like cooping him up basically. And then at some point he probably like got a little bit like ornery because he was like, "What are you doing?" Because he's just intoxicated, and
hmm
then that could have led to them beating him up or whatever it was. And who knows how many times this happened or what else happened. And then he gets on, they like ship him on a train or whatever, and he's like just totally delirious and dehydrated from whatever happened to him on however many days ago, and he's just totally out of it, and he just kind of like dies from exhaustion right there.
Yeah. Well, especially the fact that he had left his Richmond, Virginia, and he was going back home to New York, and just his whereabouts were just unknown until he shows up October 3rd in Baltimore.
Yeah, of
Like,
all places.
right. So what happened there? Like, I mean, this is the 1800s, so yeah, a trip from Virginia to New York probably took a while, a couple days. Even on a train, I would say it probably took at least a day, you know. Um, so like where was he in that time? From 1849 till or I mean from September 27th till October 3rd.
Getting
Like,
cooped.
right. Exactly. And they just dumped him in a bar in Baltimore cuz where else?
Yeah, that could be.
Especially if they knew he was a drunk already. It's like, oh, people just suspect that he's drunk and he's just, he's an idiot. He's a drunken idiot. So let's just dump him there.
Yeah, so I think we can close the book on this guy. I wonder if that's the reason why the team took the name the Baltimore Ravens, was because he was found dead in Baltimore, basically.
That could be.
That would make sense. Kind of a
Yeah.
weird thing, but okay.
Well, I think he also had lived in Baltimore at some point too. He
I
was,
think, yeah, I think he had to. He's buried in Baltimore, actually.
yeah.
Yeah, so that would actually make sense. Yeah, so I'm sure at like some point he had passed through Baltimore. He had passed through Baltimore at some point in his life.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's interesting. But also also this is another thing. Fake news is also as American as apple pie, because it turns out he had the guy who, of course, wrote his obituary. Or at least one of the people who wrote his obituary was one of his like literary rivals. This guy, Rufus Wilmot Griswold. So he wrote like a high profile obituary under a pseudonym for Poe, and he just like made up like a bunch of crap about it just to like basically like defame him in
Yeah.
reads. It was published in the New York Tribune, signed Ludwig on the day Poe was buried. So like this guy just like really had it in for him for whatever reason. But he like, and then eventually they like figured it out that it was him,
Yeah.
and they were just like, oh, okay, well, like this guy, like, and like they knew that he had like that he held a grudge against Poe since 1842. So they were just like, oh, all right, well, this guy's a schmuck, so like we can't trust this guy anymore. So even that is as American as apple pie. This is a very timely podcast.
Yeah.
It is so interesting on how many things have aligned with present day.
Well, I think Edgar Allan Poe is as American as Apple. This whole podcast is American.
American as apple pie. That might be the name of it. As American as apple pie.
The sad thing is, too, is that obituary kind of like tainted people's perception of Poe for a long time, and a lot of biographers even use that description of Poe in their biographies, kind of. So that really kind of screwed Poe over a lot. You know, I think it made him look bad, and just, you know, it's stupid that. And again, back then they didn't have like instantaneous like, oh, you know, we fact check this and it's wrong.
Yeah, but even now
it took a while.
Yeah, but even now we have instantaneous fact checking that even like they.
Well, that's wrong. Yeah, because the fact checkers. Who's checking the fact checkers?
Right, like you need that too because like a lot of times like they'll tell you that a fact that's true is actually wrong because it's not a fact that that's particularly aligned with their belief system. So it's like this whole thing is just out of whack.
Who watches The Watchmen?
Yeah, exactly. That'd be a good one. But I gotta watch the HBO show first. Anyway, have anything else to mention on this wonderful writer? That's American as apple pie, as some say.
No, I think anybody who hasn't read Poe. First of all, like, I don't know how, because it's one of the most prolific. Like, if you went to school in America, I think you pretty much had to have read Poe at some point, just because he's included in a lot of curriculums from like elementary school up through high school.
And if you don't live in America, then we'll give you a pass on that because that there's some guy in like Norway where Norwegian people are just like, what? How's nobody known this guy?
Well, I would even say that even there, just because of how many films and like, you know, if you want to say, okay, writing is not as prolific, whatever, but like films are definitely prolific all over the world.
Oh yeah.
So there's probably like very few people who have not heard of Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah, I would be very surprised.
But if you haven't, go read him. He's great. You know, his short stories are amazing. His poems are amazing. There's so much great content there. And they'll really draw you in, and he really had a way of like painting a picture. And if you have any kind of like, if you like, you know, horror or dark, you know, macabre stuff, like Poe is like the master of that. You know, the stuff that we got after, you know, H.P. Lovecraft, modern horror, all this stuff would not exist. You know, Sherlock Holmes would not exist without Edgar Allan Poe.
Yep.
So
he's the granddaddy of American Gothic literature. He's the granddaddy of modern horror.
Yes.
You might even say he's the old dirty bastard of horror. Because there ain't no father to his style. Edgar Allan Poe, everybody. So we want to thank you again for joining us this evening. And, you know, just once again, from the bottom of our hearts, we really appreciate each and every one of you that, you know, tunes in and week out just to hear what like two schmucks have to say. So we really appreciate it, and you know, just keep showing us love, and we'll keep showing you love. And for God's sakes, enjoy your October.
Carve some pumpkins and drink some apple cider.
There you go. But stay away from those opioids.
Yeah, don't drink Ladownum. I don't even think it's a thing anymore, but don't do it.
No, not at all. If you happen to come by someone who is selling Ladownum, you should probably report them and possibly question where the hell they got that. But this has been Why Does This Exist? I've been Chris.
I've been Rob.
And remember, everybody, question everything.
Good night, everybody.